Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work as a funeral director at a family-owned funeral home downtown. Part of my job means I'm always dressed professionally. Dark suits are basically my uniform. Whether I'm meeting with grieving families, coordinating with the cemetery, or handling arrangements, I need to look respectful and put together. On that day, I just finished meeting with the Hansley family about their grandmother's service. It was an emotional meeting that ran longer than expected, and by the time I wrapped up, it was already past 7 p.m. I was heading home when I realized my fridge was completely empty, except for some questionable leftover Chinese food and a half-empty jar of pickles. I pulled into Peterson's Market, the little grocery store near my apartment. It's nothing fancy, just a small neighborhood place that stays open late and has decent prices. I only needed a few basics to get me through the next couple of days, but eggs were the priority since I'd been planning to make breakfast before work the next morning. I grabbed a carton of eggs from the dairy section and was making my way toward the checkout when this guy appeared out of nowhere and stepped directly in front of me. He was maybe in his 50s, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans that had seen better days. His cart was full of beer and frozen dinners, and he had this look on his face like he owned the place. He demanded to know if I was a manager at the store. It wasn't really a question, but more like an order, the way he said it. Like he expected me to drop everything and help him with whatever problem he had. I told him no and tried to step around him, but he moved to block my path again. All I wanted was to buy my eggs and get home. He asked why I was wearing a suit then, his voice full of accusation like I was somehow deceiving him by dressing professionally. I looked down at my simple black suit, nothing flashy, just standard business attire that I wear every single day for work. I told him I didn't owe him answers. His face went completely blank. It was like watching a computer crash in real time. His mouth opened slightly, his eyes got this glazed look, and he just stood there staring at me. I could practically see the gears grinding in his head when he tried to process the fact that I wasn't going to explain myself to him. I've seen this look before, usually when people realize that the world doesn't revolve around them. It's that moment when someone who's used to getting their way suddenly encounters someone who won't play along with their entitled behavior. While he stood there having his mental malfunction, I stepped around him and headed for the checkout line. The cashier, a teenage girl with purple streaks in her hair, had been watching the whole thing with wide eyes. She asked if I was just buying the eggs, and I confirmed that was all I needed. When she rang me up, I could hear the guy behind me starting to recover from his confusion. He was muttering something to himself, but I couldn't make out the words and honestly didn't care to. She told me the total was $2.49. I handed her a $5 and told her to keep the change. When I picked up my eggs and turned to leave, the guy had apparently found his voice again. He shouted that I couldn't just ignore customers like that and claimed he had questions that needed answering. I stopped and turned around. The entire front of the store was watching now. The cashier, an older woman in line behind him, and even the stock boy, who'd been arranging something near the entrance. I reminded him that I didn't work there and had already told him that. He insisted on knowing why I was dressed like management then. I explained that I had just come from work, that thing people do to earn money. He wanted to know what kind of work required a suit at 7 p.m. The entitlement was just incredible. This complete stranger felt like he had the right to interrogate me about my career and clothing choices because he couldn't accept that someone in a suit might not work at the grocery store. I told him it was the kind of work that paid well enough that I didn't have to explain myself to random people in grocery stores. His face started turning red. I could see him getting more agitated, like my refusal to submit to his questioning was somehow a personal attack on him. He accused me of being very rude and said all he wanted was some help. The cashier offered to call their actual manager who was in the back office, but the guy said he didn't want the manager now. Instead, he wanted to know why I thought I was too good to help customers. That's when I realized what was really going on. This wasn't just about mistaking me for an employee. This guy was offended by the very idea that someone would dress better than him and not be available to serve him. My suit somehow threatened his ego. I told him I was sorry he was having whatever problem he was having, but it wasn't my job to solve it. I explained that I didn't work there, had never worked there, and wasn't going to pretend to work there just to make him feel better. I started walking toward the exit, but he followed me. He ranted about how things were different in his day when people helped each other out. I replied that in his day, people also minded their own business. He threatened to complain about this and demanded to know my name. I told him my name was not your employee and I worked at None of Your Business Incorporated. The cashier actually snorted, trying not to laugh. Even the older woman in line was smiling now. The guy sputtered that I couldn't talk to him like that. I simply told him to watch me. I walked out of the store and got in my car. Through the window, I could see him still standing there, gesturing wildly at anyone who would listen. The cashier was shaking her head, and I'm pretty sure I saw her reach for the phone, probably to call the actual manager. When I drove home, I kept thinking about how some people just can't handle the word no. This guy couldn't accept that not everyone exists to serve him. He saw someone dressed professionally and automatically assumed they should drop everything to cater to his needs. 2 days later, when I stopped by Peterson's again for milk, the same cashier was working and she recognized me immediately. She greeted me and asked how things were going. I said I hoped they were better than Tuesday. She told me I should have seen what happened after I left. That guy had spent another 10 minutes ranting about customer service until their manager came out. When he found out I really didn't work there, he banned the guy from the store for harassing customers. I asked if she was serious and she confirmed it was completely true. She explained that the manager said anyone who couldn't tell the difference between employees and customers probably shouldn't be shopping there anyway. So in the end, the guy who demanded answers got one he wasn't expecting. After finishing my PhD in physics from the State University, I managed to land a decent job at a research facility where I actually got to use my education. The pay was good enough that I could afford a house, but the mortgage was still pretty steep. That's when I decided to rent out a couple of rooms to help cover the costs. I was pretty selective about tenants. I preferred renting to friends or people in my circle because it felt safer and more comfortable. For about a year, this arrangement worked perfectly. Then my friend Sarah called me up with a sob story about her ex-husband. Sarah explained that her ex-husband was in a really tough spot and had been couch surfing for months. She asked if I would consider renting him a room because he could barely afford anything. I was hesitant about renting to an ex since that could get messy, but Sarah pleaded with me to think about it. She said he was really struggling and she felt partially responsible for how things ended between them. I agreed to meet him. He seemed desperate and genuinely down on his luck, so I offered him the room at a discounted rate. Big mistake. Within the first month, he was already behind on rent. He'd give me excuse after excuse about why his paycheck was delayed or why some unexpected expense had come up. But what really got under my skin was his attitude about everything else. This guy lived almost entirely on canned food. Beans, soup, ravioli, you name it. Every single day I'd hear him in the kitchen using my can opener. I didn't mind sharing kitchen tools, but he treated my stuff like it belonged to him. When he wasn't eating his canned meals, I'd notice my food disappearing from the fridge, my leftover pizza, my sandwich ingredients, even my fancy coffee that I only bought as a treat for myself. But the absolute worst part was how he talked to me. See, he had a PhD from Harvard, and he made sure I never forgot it. He would constantly bring up how, when he was at Harvard working on his dissertation, they had access to resources that most universities could only dream of. Then he'd tell me that while my state school education was probably adequate for what I needed, there was really nothing quite like the Harvard experience. This happened constantly. He'd find ways to bring up Harvard in conversations about everything from the weather to what was on TV. Meanwhile, he was working at a minimum wage job that had nothing to do with his field, while I was actually using my education in my career. The irony was completely lost on him. One morning, I went to the kitchen to make breakfast and found my can opener on the counter, completely destroyed. The cutting wheel was bent, the handle was cracked, and it looked like someone had tried to force it to work long after it was clearly broken. A few minutes later, he walked into the kitchen and told me he needed to talk about something. I guessed it had to do with my broken can opener, and he confirmed this. He then told me that when I'm the landlord, I'm responsible for providing basic kitchen equipment and needed to replace the can opener. I stared at him for a moment, trying to process what I just heard. I pointed out that he had broken my can opener, and now he was telling me I had to replace it. He explained that it was a shared kitchen appliance and these things wear out, claiming it was just part of being a landlord. I reminded him that he used it every single day for every meal while I used it maybe once a week. He said he didn't want to get into an argument about it and just needed the working can opener, asking if I could pick one up that day. The audacity was breathtaking, but I kept my cool and agreed to get a new can opener. He thanked me and said he knew I'd be reasonable about this. That afternoon, I went to the kitchen supply store and spent some time looking at different can openers. Most of them were the standard type that anyone could figure out how to use. But then I found something special. It was a manual can opener that worked using the same mechanism like an electric one. Instead of the traditional design where you squeeze the handles together, this one had a gear system that you had to turn while holding it in a very specific way. It was tricky even for me to figure out at first. I brought it home and put it in the kitchen drawer without saying anything. The next morning, I heard frustrated noises coming from the kitchen. I found several mangled cans in the trash, their tops torn and jagged like someone had tried to attack them with a hammer. He complained that the can opener was defective. I told him it seemed to work fine for me. He asked how I used it because it wasn't working right for him. I picked it up and demonstrated opening a can smoothly in about 10 seconds. I said it seemed to work perfectly. He asked how I did that and wanted me to show him again. I told him that a guy with a Harvard PhD should certainly be able to figure that out on his own, if a guy like me with just a state school education could. He struggled between his pride and his desperate need to open his canned food. He said this was ridiculous and just wanted me to tell him how to use it. I replied that I was sure someone with his superior education could work it out, especially since he'd made it very clear that Harvard provides a much better education than my little state school. For the next week, I continued finding destroyed cans in the trash. He'd buy canned food, fail to open it properly, and throw away perfectly good food rather than admit he couldn't figure out a simple kitchen tool. Sometimes I'd find 3 or 4 mangled cans from a single meal attempt. He started eating out more, which I knew he couldn't afford. His rent payments became even more sporadic, but his pride wouldn't let him ask for help with the can opener again. One day, I came home to find him in the kitchen with a hammer and screwdriver, trying to puncture holes in a can of soup. I mentioned that there was a much easier way to do that, but he said he was fine. I asked if he was sure because it looked like he was about to hammer a screwdriver through his hand, but he repeated that he was fine. 20 minutes later, he gave up and ordered pizza delivery. Again. This went on for about 3 weeks. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He came to me and asked if I could please just show him how to use the can opener, promising to pay for all the food he'd wasted. I asked what happened to that superior Harvard intellect. He told me not to be like that, but I reminded him that he'd spent months telling me how much better his education was than mine. I pointed out that he'd made it clear he thought I was beneath him intellectually, so surely this simple task should be easy for someone of his caliber. He told me to forget it, but I could see he was breaking. His pride was costing him money he didn't have. The final straw came when I found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, desperately trying to open a can of beans with a kitchen knife. He'd already cut himself once and was bleeding on the counter. I told him this was getting dangerous and to give me the can. I opened it for him in seconds. He asked how I made it look so easy, and I simply said it was practice. The next morning, he announced he was moving out at the end of the month. He said he'd found a place that was a better fit for someone with his qualifications. I just nodded and wished him luck. After he left, I kept the tricky can opener. It still sits in my kitchen drawer today. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what does matter is that I've been planning this wedding for over a year. My fiancé and I saved every penny we could. I worked double shifts at the diner, and he picked up weekend construction jobs. We wanted our day to be perfect, even on a tight budget. The venue was a small community center that we decorated ourselves with flowers from my aunt's garden. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. The guest list was small, just close family and friends. About 50 people total. Now, my husband's family, that's where things get complicated. His mom had remarried a few years ago to this guy who seemed nice enough, but his new wife, Karen, came with a 17-year-old daughter who had some serious boundary issues. This girl had been obsessed with my then fiance since she met him at family gatherings. She would constantly text him, show up uninvited to our apartment, and make weird comments about how they were meant to be together. My fiance always shut it down politely, but Karen would defend her daughter every single time. Karen would tell us that her daughter was just expressing her feelings and that we should be flattered that such a young, beautiful girl liked him. It was creepy and uncomfortable, but we figured once we got married, the girl would move on. The morning of the wedding, everything was going smoothly. I was getting my makeup done when my maid of honor rushed over looking panicked. She told me I needed to see something and showed me her phone. The stepdaughter had posted on social media about attending her future husband's wedding and how she was going to make her move that day. The post had pictures of her in this completely inappropriate white dress that looked more like a cocktail dress than wedding guest attire. I said it was insane and that she couldn't seriously think she could disrupt our wedding. But I decided not to let it ruin my day. I figured she was just a confused teenager and surely Karen would keep her in line. The ceremony went off without a hitch. My husband looked so handsome in his borrowed suit, and when we said our vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even Karen seemed to be behaving. Then came the reception. We had just finished our first dance when Karen walked up to us with her daughter in tow. The girl was sulking and had clearly been crying. Karen demanded to talk about the seating arrangements. I asked her what about them. She said that her daughter should be sitting at the head table with us because she was family and deserved to be up there. The head table was just for the wedding party. Me, my husband, my maid of honor, and his best man. That's it. I apologized but explained that the head table was just for the wedding party and that her daughter was seated with the rest of the family at table 3. Karen said that wasn't acceptable and that her daughter had been looking forward to sitting next to him all day. My husband asked why she would be looking forward to sitting next to him, saying it was weird. Karen got angry and told him not to dare call her daughter weird, saying that she had feelings for him and that he needed to respect that. I was shocked and reminded her that he was married now. To me, today, right then. But Karen wasn't done. She announced that after dinner, her daughter wanted to take some romantic photos with him by the altar, just a few pictures for her room. My new husband looked like he was going to be sick. He refused, saying it was completely inappropriate. Karen accused him of being selfish and said her daughter had been dreaming about this day for months. I shouted that it was my wedding day, not hers. Karen yelled back that her daughter needed this moment and had been practicing poses and everything. At this point, other guests were starting to stare. My dad started walking over, probably sensing trouble. My husband tried to reason with her, explaining that he was married now and her daughter needed to accept that and move on. That's when Karen completely lost it. She screamed that he had led her daughter on by smiling at her at Christmas and hugging her goodbye at Easter. I pointed out that those were normal family interactions. Karen shouted that her daughter deserved better and was prettier than me anyway. My dad reached us just when Karen grabbed the nearest chair and lifted it over her head. Everything happened so fast. She was aiming right for me, screaming something about how I stole her daughter's happiness. But my husband stepped in front of me just when she threw it. The wooden chair hit him square in the back and knocked him to the ground. The crash was so loud that the entire reception fell silent. Karen kept screaming that it was all our fault and that we had made her do it. She was still screaming while my husband was lying on the floor, not moving. I dropped to my knees beside him. I yelled for someone to call an ambulance. My maid of honor was already dialing while my dad and uncle restrained Karen, who was still trying to get to me. The stepdaughter was crying in the corner, finally seeming to realize how insane this whole situation was. Karen continued yelling that he deserved it and that we both deserved it. My dad told her to sit down and shut up before he called the police himself. Karen screamed back that he couldn't tell her what to do and that the whole wedding was a sham anyway. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes, and by then my husband was conscious but in serious pain. They said he likely had a concussion and possible back injury from the impact. When they loaded him onto the stretcher, Karen made one last attempt at justifying herself by saying this wouldn't have happened if we had just let her daughter have her moment. That's when I finally snapped. I told her that her daughter was a child who needed therapy and that she needed to be in jail. The police arrived just when the ambulance was leaving. Multiple guests gave statements about what they witnessed. Karen tried to claim it was an accident, but that chair throwing was caught on my cousin's phone while he was filming the reception. At the hospital, we learned my husband had a mild concussion and severe bruising, but thankfully no permanent damage. The doctor said if the chair had hit him just a few inches higher, it could have been much worse. Karen was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and disturbing the peace. Her stepdaughter had to give a statement too, and apparently finally admitted to the police that she knew her behavior toward my husband was inappropriate. Karen's own husband, my husband's stepfather, filed for divorce the next week. We never got to finish our reception or cut our wedding cake, but honestly, seeing Karen in handcuffs was better than any wedding cake could have been. My husband recovered fully, Karen got 6 months in jail and had to pay our medical bills, and her daughter was required to attend counseling. I'm 25 and currently 4 months pregnant with our first child. My husband is 27 and up until recently I thought he was understanding. We've been together for 3 years, married for 1, and this pregnancy was planned. We were both excited when we found out. The thing is, nobody really prepares you for all the weird stuff that comes with pregnancy. Sure, everyone knows about morning sickness and weird cravings, but there are so many other things that can happen. In my case, I developed something called pregnancy rhinitis around week 10. It's like having a permanent head cold that just won't go away. My nose is constantly stuffy, I can barely breathe through it, and it makes me sound like I'm talking through cotton balls all the time. The doctor explained that it's caused by hormonal changes and increased blood flow during pregnancy. It's completely normal, affects about 20% of pregnant women, and there's really nothing I can do about it except wait it out. It usually goes away after delivery, but until then, I'm stuck with it. Some days are worse than others, but yesterday was particularly bad. My husband and I usually spend our evenings together watching movies or playing games. He's really into gaming, and before I got pregnant, I used to enjoy playing with him. We'd spend hours on co-op games or take turns on single-player stuff, but lately everything has been different. The congestion makes me feel foggy and tired all the time. I can't concentrate the way I used to, and honestly, I just don't have the energy for gaming sessions that stretch late into the night. I've tried to explain this to him, but he doesn't seem to get it. Yesterday evening, he came into the living room where I was lying on the couch with a warm compress on my face, trying to get some relief from the congestion. He cheerfully asked if I wanted to play that new puzzle game we bought last week. I told him I wasn't feeling great because my nose was completely blocked and I had a headache. He insisted it would be fun and might take my mind off feeling sick. I didn't want to disappoint him, so I agreed. We set up the game and started playing. It's one of those cooperative puzzle games where you need to communicate constantly to solve the challenges. But with my nose completely stuffed up, I sounded terrible and kept having to stop to blow my nose or clear my throat. After about 20 minutes, I could tell he was getting frustrated. He asked me to please try to focus and complained that I wasn't even really trying. I explained that I was trying but having trouble concentrating because I could barely breathe. He pointed out that I've been like this for weeks and that it was just a stuffy nose. I tried to push through and keep playing, but my heart wasn't in it. The puzzles required quick thinking and clear communication, and I just couldn't deliver either. Every time I tried to explain a solution, I'd start coughing or have to pause to deal with my congestion. He complained that it wasn't fun when I wasn't actually participating. I told him I was doing my best and that this wasn't exactly fun for me either. Then he said something that really set me off. He acknowledged that I was pregnant, but accused me of letting this pregnancy rhinitis thing ruin everything we used to enjoy together. That's when I lost it. Here I am, growing his child, dealing with a condition that makes me miserable every single day, and he's complaining that it's ruining his gaming experience. I asked him if he was serious and whether he thought I was choosing to feel this way. He backtracked and said he didn't mean that, but suggested I could at least try to have a better attitude about it. I asked him if he wanted me to have a better attitude when I felt like I had the flu every single day. Then he made it even worse by saying that other pregnant women don't let every little symptom control their whole personality. That's when I called him an idiot and told him he could criticize my attitude when he went through pregnancy himself and saw how he handled feeling like garbage for months on end. He got offended that I called him names and said I was being a big jerk. I shot back that he was the one complaining that my pregnancy symptoms were inconvenient for his entertainment. The argument escalated from there. He walked off to his office and slammed the door. I went to bed early, and we barely spoke this morning before he left for a work meeting. But here's where it gets even better. This morning I woke up to find that he had posted in a gaming forum complaining about how his moody pregnant wife won't play games with him anymore and asking for advice on how to deal with pregnant partners who use their symptoms as excuses. I only found out because a mutual friend saw the post and sent me a screenshot. In the post, he made it sound like I was being dramatic and using pregnancy as an excuse to be lazy. He didn't mention pregnancy rhinitis specifically, just said I was always complaining about being stuffy and that it was probably psychosomatic anyway. The responses were mixed. Some people told him to be more understanding, but others agreed with him and said pregnant women often use their condition to get out of doing things they don't want to do. One person even suggested that I was probably milking it for attention. I was so angry I could barely see straight. Not only was he dismissive of my very real medical condition, but he was also airing our private relationship issues to strangers on the internet and painting me as some kind of manipulative person. When he got home from his meeting, I confronted him about the post. I asked him about the post where he apparently called me a moody, excuse-making wife. He looked confused and asked what I was talking about. I explained that I was referring to the post he made that morning asking strangers how to deal with his pregnant wife who won't play games anymore. His face went pale when he realized I'd seen it. He said he was just venting and looking for advice. I pointed out that he'd made me sound like I was faking my symptoms for attention. He insisted he never said I was faking anything. I reminded him that he literally said it was probably psychosomatic. He started to say he was just frustrated, but I cut him off and asked why he decided to humiliate me online instead of having an adult conversation with me. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I packed a bag and told him I was going to stay with my sister for a few days while he figured out whether he wanted to be supportive of his pregnant wife or keep acting like an entitled child who couldn't handle that his gaming buddy wasn't available 24/7. When I walked out the door, he looked shocked. Apparently, he hadn't expected there to be any real results for his behavior. He's been calling and texting nonstop, but I'm not ready to deal with him yet. He needs to really understand what it means to be alone before he can appreciate having a partner who's literally growing his child while dealing with uncomfortable symptoms every single day. 3 months ago, my grandmother moved in with us. She's in hospice care, which means she's in her final stages. The doctors gave her maybe 2 to 3 months, but she's a fighter. Still, her condition is serious. She can't handle loud noises or sudden disturbances. Her sleep is precious because pain medication makes her drowsy, and when she's awake, every moment of peace matters. My wife and I decided to care for her at home instead of putting her in a facility. It was the right choice for our family, but it meant making some serious adjustments. We moved our bedroom upstairs and gave her the master bedroom on the main floor so she wouldn't have to deal with stairs. We installed a hospital bed and all the medical equipment she needs. The biggest challenge became the constant stream of door-to-door salespeople, religious groups, and various contractors who somehow think our quiet residential neighborhood is prime hunting ground. At first, I tried being polite. I would explain the situation to them, ask them to please not knock so loudly, and request they avoid our house in the future. That didn't work. The same roofing company sent someone 3 times in 1 week. A guy selling magazine subscriptions knocked so hard he woke my grandmother from her afternoon nap, and it took her 2 hours to fall back asleep. That's when I decided enough was enough. I went to the local hardware store and bought the most obvious doormat I could find. It's bright red with white letters that say, "Do not knock, hospice patient inside." I figured that would be clear enough for anyone with basic reading skills and human decency. I was wrong. The first week after putting up the doormat, I caught a woman from some cleaning service literally standing on it while pounding on my door. When I pointed it out to her, she just shrugged and told me she thought it was decorative. Then there was the guy selling pest control services who not only ignored the mat, but had the nerve to suggest that dying people probably attract bugs anyway, so I should definitely buy his service. But the incident that really pushed me over the edge happened last Tuesday. I was in the kitchen preparing my grandmother's medication when someone started banging on the front door like they were the police with a warrant. My grandmother jolted awake and started crying from the pain of moving too quickly. I rushed to the door, took a deep breath to calm myself, and opened it. Standing there was a young guy in his 20s wearing a reflective vest and carrying a clipboard. He had that overly enthusiastic salesperson smile that I've grown to hate. He immediately launched into his pitch, shouting about how he was working in the neighborhood. I interrupted him and asked if he had read the doormat. He seemed confused and started talking about my neighbors before stopping mid-sentence to ask what I meant. I pointed down at the mat and asked again if he had read it. The guy looked down for maybe half a second before looking back up, clearly not processing what he'd seen. He said he hadn't read it and tried to continue his pitch about working in the neighborhood. At this point, I was fighting every instinct to slam the door in his face. Instead, I interrupted him again and asked if he knew what hospice was. This seemed to catch him off guard. His salesperson autopilot finally shut off. He stammered and asked if hospice was when people were dying or something like that. I said that yes, that's exactly what it was, and pointed directly at the doormat. For the first time, he actually read the sign. His face went from confused to embarrassed to something approaching shame. He just stood there for several seconds, clearly processing what he had just realized. I asked if there was anything else he needed. He quietly said no, sounding uncertain and embarrassed. I closed the door without another word. Through the window, I watched him walk away, looking back at our house twice before getting into his truck. Here's the thing that really gets me. This isn't an isolated incident. Since putting up that doormat, I've had dozens of people ignore it completely. I even tried adding paper signs taped to the door, but I have security camera footage of people literally ripping them down and throwing them in my bushes before knocking. It's like some of these people think their commission or quota is more important than basic human decency. The doormat costs $12. It's not hidden or hard to read. You literally have to step on it to reach my door. My grandmother passed away peacefully last week. In her final days, she was able to rest without interruption because I finally started answering the door exactly how I did with that contractor. Word got around the neighborhood about the crazy guy who won't let salespeople finish their pitches, and most of them started avoiding our house entirely. The few who still tried got the same treatment. I would ask them to read the mat, make them understand what hospice means, watch them feel appropriately ashamed, and then watch them leave. It worked every single time, and I kept the doormat up even after the funeral. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.